topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, glad you could join us, America. Bill Martinez here with the American Minute creator and speaker, nationally renowned that he is, the one and only Bill Federer. Mr. Bill, how are we doing?
Hey, great to be with you, Bill.
Hey, always good to have you here with us, especially I'm particularly interested in what you've been writing about in recounting history as it relates to Iran, parts 1, 2, and 3 at the American Minute.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating when you go through from ancient history up to the present. So the Persia used to be called Elam, and that was the name of Noah's grandson through Shem. So Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so Shem, out of which the Israel came, but Shem is also the father of Elam. And so Elam went down that same Tigris-Euphrates River Valley and settled out near the Persian Gulf. And so that is where Iran is. So the name originally was Elam, then Persia, then Iran, where we get this civilization that we have there today. Abraham fought a battle against the king of Elam, Chedorlaomer. Remember when he had his 300 men chasing after getting Lot back?
Right, exactly.
And but then the major empires in the world were Egypt and Assyria and Babylon, and then comes along Elam. It grows and it conquers Babylon, it conquers Assyria, and then you have Cyrus of Persia around 550 BC, and it becomes the biggest empire in the world at the time. 127 provinces, and so Cyrus tried invading into Greece, and he around 490 BC, and he gets driven back. We're familiar with the Battle of Marathon because the messengers gave the news of the victory, and they had to run 21 some odd miles back from the city, the Battle of Marathon, to report the news. And so that gave birth to the race, the marathon. But that was Darius. So after Cyrus, you have Darius, and it was Darius that invaded Greece in 490 BC. And then Darius's son is Xerxes. And in 480 BC, Xerxes invades Greece, wins a couple battles, and then loses the famous Battle of Salamis. It was a naval battle. And so Xerxes is pretty bummed out, and he goes back to Persia, and he spends time with his harem, and that's where we get the story of Esther, and then Haman and all the rest. And but the Persia controlled the area that was Israel. All right, so Cyrus let the Jews go back and rebuild, and then Darius continued to allow them, and they grew. But then Alexander the Great conquers, and 333 BC, right around then, he conquers Persia, and he then dies shortly thereafter. He tried to meld the Greek culture with the Persian culture, and he had like 300 of his officers marry Persian wives, and so this time you see this Greek culture coming into Persia. But Alexander the Great dies, and his empire is divided into 4 with a general Seleucus taking Persia. And so it's called the Seleucid Empire, and it's powerful. And
Was it the most powerful of the four, Bill?
Yeah.
The Seleucid
So,
Empire? Yeah.
you had Ptolemies in Egypt. And so the Ptolemies, they viewed Greek as superior to Egyptian. So for several centuries, you had these Greek ruling the Egyptian people, and they didn't even speak the language of the Egyptian people. Like the common people spoke Coptic, but Greek was the superior language, and that was all the way until Cleopatra. She was the last Ptolemaic ruler, and she had married.
So for the Egyptians, it's almost like deja vu one more time, but the roles reverse. Now instead of being the slave holders, they are the slaves, right? As opposed to what they did with the Hebrews.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because back in the Bible story, Joseph took all the land away from the people during this famine, right?
Right.
And it centralized power. Well, that power stayed centralized so that it was passed down to where the Pharaoh owned everything in Egypt. And the people didn't have guns or weapons. Obviously, they didn't have guns way back then, but they didn't have weapons. And so it was a top-down system for centuries, sort of like China, with the emperor owning everything, but even more so in Egypt. But the history is fascinating. So Persia had the Seleucid Empire until 167 BC. You have a ruler of Seleucid Persia named Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and he hated Jews. And he thought the Jews were wanting to rebel, and so he went in there and killed and pillaged and destroyed and desecrated the temple. And you had the Maccabee priestly family, and they started a guerrilla warfare, and they drove the Seleucid Syrian/Greek rulers out, and it's called Hanukkah, where they rededicated the temple, and so for 100 years, Judea was its own nation again. And we sort of overlooked this, but it was not part of Persia, not part of Rome, not part of Greece. It was its own nation.
Bill, let me ask you something here, because you brought up the Maccabees, and Jonathan Cahn, our good friend, said the other day that the concept of Hanukkah, it was not in the Bible, but originally it was in the Bible with the book of Maccabees. And what you're talking about is a portion of history that is documented in the book of Maccabees that has kind of gotten lost because it's not part of the current tradition of 66 books of the modern Bible, right?
Yeah. So when Martin Luther had the Reformation, I think there were like 80 books, and then the Ethiopian church has even more books. They have, the book of Enoch and different things. But the canon, which means rule or standard, decided on the 66 books. And how did they do that? They basically included the Old Testament books that Jesus and the apostles personally referenced. So the attitude was, if it was good enough for Jesus and the apostles, it's good enough for us. So the Old Testament books that Jesus and or the apostles quoted from, those are the ones in the Old Testament. Now, the other ones, what's called Apocrypha, they're considered good for history, but maybe there's some doctrinal things in there that are not really clear. And so the decision was made to say, well, we're not going to have them be part of the canon.
Right.
But there's, interesting insights on that.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I've been doing some studying on it. That's why I bring that up. So I appreciate you addressing it. We're talking with Bill Federer, the American Minute creator and national speaker and author. Bill, again, those books, which, as you mentioned, they refer to as the Apocrypha, were still part of I guess the accepted canon for many years. And it was only in the, I guess if you want to say the modern era, that the Apocrypha, over debate and that had been reduced. And of course, when we talk about Martin Luther, we're talking what? The 18th century, right? Are we talking the 18th century?
1500s.
15, I'm sorry. 16th century. Yeah.
But you did have like fake news today.
Yeah.
You had people writing things and attributing them to the apostles or somebody special. And so like the infancy gospel of Thomas, it's written by someone who knew nothing of Jewish life. And it's filled full of so many errors and inconsistencies that no scholar takes it serious.
Correct.
Little fanciful Harry Potter type stories that when Jesus was a kid, he made clay birds and clapped and they flew away and raised a playmate from the dead. But it's written with obvious indications that the writer did not know what was going on in Israel at the time. And it would be like you writing a childhood of Lincoln and describing him living in China. It's
right.
like, I don't think that happened.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, Muhammad was illiterate. And he was never able to read the Bible, but he heard these oral stories, and he heard some of those infancy gospel stories of Thomas and included them in Islam. So now they take them as fact.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's a whole nother interesting thing. So Persia got into a war with Rome, and it went on for
now,
7.
This is what we're about 150 now, BC, or 100.
Yeah. So Israel was its own nation from around 167 BC when they drove the Seleucids out up until around 63 BC. So for an entire century, interestingly enough, they had a civil war between the Sadducees and Pharisees. So Sadducees were ones wanting to kiss up to the Greeks, and they sort of were embarrassed about their Jewish history, and they did not believe in miracles and the supernatural and angels and heaven and the resurrection. They were just political Jews, and they wanted to go to the bathhouses and stuff that well, the Pharisees, when the Israelites came out of back from Persia, they had Ezra, and he taught the law. And he started what's called the Pharisee, which means the student of the law. So the word Pharisee means student of the law. Yeah. But they would add on traditions. And so that's what Jesus was critical of the Pharisees, because they added on little extra tradition here, extra tradition there. And he said, you make void the word of God by your extra traditions.
Right.
And so Jesus criticized.
And there you hear Fiddler on the Roof. Tradition, right?
So Jesus criticized the Sadducees because they didn't believe in all the miracles and the supernatural. And Jesus criticized the Pharisees because they added on so many traditions, they didn't recognize them. And we saw this division with the Apostle Paul when he's first arrested and he's called for a hearing, and the Roman governor's there, and Paul sees their Sadducees and Pharisees, and he says, I'm a Pharisee. He says, I believe in the angels. An angel appeared to me, and I believe that our prophecies are supernatural. And the Pharisees come to Paul's defense and says, well, yeah, maybe if he did see an angel. And so that's when they're starting to pull Paul apart, and the Romans rescue Paul. Anyway, so the Sadducees and Pharisees got into a civil war. The Sadducees controlled Jerusalem. They were the political Jews, and that's where the temple was. And so all the temple stuff was being carried on by this Sadducee group. Well, the Pharisees lived in the rural countryside, and they had synagogues, which means meeting house. And that's where everybody in town would come and do their city business, but that's also where they'd come and hear the law. And so they were sort of the decentralized ones. They were more of the wanting a smaller central government, so to speak. But it got into a war. So they killed thousands of each other. And so now, 63 BC, you have Pompey, the Roman general, and he's conquering in Cappadocia near the Black Sea. And somebody brings him a message that there's a civil war going on in Judea. and he says, "Great time to invade." So he
Hmm.
comes in and sides with the Pharisees against the Sadducees and captures Jerusalem and kills a bunch of the Sadducees and gets to the Temple Mount. And Pompey goes into the temple and he sees it and he turns around and comes out and tells his men, "Don't touch this place." And so the Jews liked the Romans and they liked Pompey for a while. But from that moment on, Judea was a Roman province. And gradually the Romans got more and more and more involved till pretty soon they control the whole thing.
Right.
And so the Romans were in a 7th century war with Persia, 700 years. And as time went on, now we had the early church, and then you had the day of Pentecost. So
Hmm.
Pentecost was before the early church, but on the day of Pentecost, it lists the people that were there, and it says that the Parthian, Medes, and Elamites were amongst all those different people that were there on the day of Pentecost. Well,
Right.
Elamites, that's Persian, so there were some Persians there on the day of
Right.
Pentecost.
Yeah.
By the way,
And hearing the words of the apostles in their own language, right?
yeah, yeah,
After the descent of the Holy Spirit.
yeah. The miracle of the Holy Spirit descending, and then the apostles and disciples that were in the upper room filled with the Holy Spirit, and they praised God. But the people thought they were drunk, and Peter said they're not drunk, but everybody heard them speaking praises to God in their own language. And well, another little trivia: Persia, Daniel was a wise man, and the Persian word for wise man is magi. They
Oh,
were sort
wow.
of like the court scholars, and they had their
Mhm.
own schools, and they would study prophecy. And
Mhm.
so, if you remember, Daniel studied the prophecies of Jeremiah and saw where Jeremiah said, "In 70 years, the Jews will go back." And so he set himself to fast and pray. And then the angel appears to him and says, "Well, from the moment you started praying, I was sent, but I was withstood by the prince of Persia."
Right.
And this was Michael, that was the prince of Israel. And
Mhm.
so we're talking, this sort of looks like the spiritual battle going on in the
Right.
heavenlies.
Well, and
But
it's interesting here because here you've got the Sadducees that don't believe in angels, but yet Daniel's talking about an angel that is over the land contesting with the evil spirits. I mean, this had to just, they probably just said, let's not even talk about it. Right.
yeah, yeah. So the thought is that Daniel was the head of these wise men, scholar advisors to the king in Persia,
Mhm.
and that this school of studying prophecies and
Mhm.
wise men continued, and evidently a segment of them believed the scriptures, and they were the wise men. Some called them the three wise men. They only say three because of the three gifts: gold, frankincense, myrrh. But the gospel doesn't actually give the number, but it
Mhm.
says wise men from the east. But the thought is these wise men from the east were Persians,
Yeah.
all right? And so that's interesting. So this war between Romans and the Persian goes on for 7 centuries, and bloody killings, and then the Roman Empire becomes Christian, and the Persian Empire, even though there are some Christian minorities, it's still Zoroastrian
Mhm.
and different type of religion. And so they beat each other up, and their major battles are in the 600s, and they so decimate each other
Mhm.
that they create a power vacuum, and into that power vacuum comes Islam. And so the but a little trivia before the Islam, you have the king of the Persians. The Persian Empire at this time is called Sasanian. So
Mhm.
you go from Cyrus of Persia, and then you go to the Alexander the Great controlled Persia, then the Seleucid Persia, but now there's Sasanian Persia, and the king is Khosrow, and Khosrow had control over an area of India, and the one Indian vassal state created a game and sent it to King Khosrow and said, if you can figure out how the rules of this game are, then we'll pay you the tribute. And if you don't figure out the rules of the game, you pay tribute to us. It was sort of a lighthearted, we're the vassal kingdom, you're the big, strong kingdom, but here we're going to, and so the game was.
Hang on a second before. Before you tell us the close on that, I just want to remind everybody we're talking with Bill Federer. He's the American Minute creator, and maybe as a sidebar, Bill, because we're reviewing basically a 3-part series on the history of Iran, which is so critical and coming into focus right now because they're grabbing a lot of the headlines these days. How can people subscribe to the American Minute?
Well, thanks. It's AmericanMinute.com. AmericanMinute.com. I send out history emails and I have books and DVDs and flash drives with my videos, but AmericanMinute.com. And a book on the subject is called What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam in the United States.
All right. Well, good. Well, all right. So picking up, here it is. You get the vassal state kind of poking fun, which is sometimes not advantageous to pick on somebody who's bigger and stronger than you. But here we go. We have a little contest here, right? Go ahead and tell our audience about that.
Right. And so the game that the Indian vassal state sends over is chess. And the Persians figure out how to play chess and figure out how the rules work. And so the Persian Sasanian kingdom creates a game and sends it over to the Indian vassal state called backgammon and says, if you can figure this out, you don't have to pay tribute anymore. But if you don't, you're going to pay the tribute. And they could not figure it out. I had somebody try to explain how backgammon works, and it's pretty confusing.
Well, I played it for many years. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I did. Yes. So,
but it's more complicated than chess, right?
Well, I don't think so. I really don't think so. I mean, you're rolling the dice, and but no, it's I didn't think it was more complicated. But it's interesting that the Persians figured out chess. And they had to do this on their own, and then give they give India the backgammon idea, but they couldn't figure it out. So then so now their enslavement is secured, right?
Yeah. So now the pressure's on. I'm gonna have to figure out how to play backgammon. So the Sasanian kingdom is big and powerful. China has a Tang dynasty, and it's getting powerful, and it decides to move its trade routes north of Persia, the China Silk Road, the Gobi Desert, all the silk trade. And so the Persians were not able to make money like they used to. So now they're hurting. And that contributes to the loss of the Persian-Roman wars that I talked about going on for 7 centuries that created this power vacuum that into it came Islam. And so Muhammad transitions from being a religious leader to a political leader to a military leader. He fights in 66 battles and raids, killing 3,000 people. And within 5 years of his death, every pre-existing culture in Arabia is conquered. Within the next 50 years, the Muslims conquer Egypt, which used to be Christian, evangelized by Mark that wrote the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They conquer North Africa. They conquer Spain, held it for 700 years. Then they conquered Jerusalem in the year 638 AD. Caliph Umar, and then you have Caliph Abd al-Malik, and he builds the Dome of the Rock, 691. But now the Muslim Arabs are invading Persia. In 634 AD, the Arab forces are led by General Saad and Khalid ibn al-Walid. And Khalid ibn al-Walid was nicknamed the Drawn Sword of Allah because he was undefeated in over 100 battles. And so this definitely was spread by the sword. And so the Arab Muslim lure the Persians into the desert where the Persian cavalry could not maneuver, right? The horses and the camels, and it's one thing on land, but on the sand and the shifting sand and the sand dunes. And so the Persians lose the battles of Narmak and Kaskar, and now you have a big segment of the Persian army is defeated, especially after the wars with the Romans, and the Persians are a sitting duck, and the Muslim army is charging toward Ctesiphon, which was the capital of Persia for 800 years, and the emperor is Yazdegerd III, and as the Muslim army is coming, he sends them a message. If it would be agreeable to peace on the condition that the Tigris should be the boundary between you and us, so that whatever is with us on the eastern side of the Tigris River remains ours, whatever you've gained on the western side is yours, and if this does not satisfy your land hunger, then nothing would satisfy you. And General Saad responded that Muslims were not hungry for land, they were fighting to convert Persians to Islam. And so a Persian poet, Ferdowsi, wrote a famous poem called Shahnameh, and it's the longest poem ever written by one person, 60,000 rhyming couplets, and it's written in the Persian Farsi language, not in the Arabic language. And so it's sort of a pushback, but he's considered the most famous Persian Farsi poet. So he writes a poem about this Muslim conquest, and he has in the poem the Emperor Yazdegerd saying, "Damn this fate, the uncivilized Arabs are come to make me Muslim." And so, and that's what happened. So just like in Egypt, the Muslims came in and brought their Arabic language, and the Sultan Hakim, like we have Hakim Jeffries, right? Hakim is his Muslim name. Sultan Hakim decided to cut out the tongues of everybody speaking Coptic in Egypt and force them to speak Arabic. And so some towns had entire piles of tongues, and they would listen at the door and kick it in if they heard somebody in the house speaking the Coptic Egyptian language, and cut out their tongues. So, but in Persia, they brought in their Arabic. Now, the common people still spoke Farsi, but now the official language is Arabic. And so you have the Muslims that now have taken over Persia, invading Pakistan and Afghanistan and attacking the Punjab and the Sikhs and the Sindh and all these different Indian people groups. And so then you have a melding of the Persian culture, which was a superior culture, together with the Arab Muslim religion. And this is called the Abbasid Empire. And it's considered the Islamic Golden Age because you have Persian culture together with this Islamic religion. And
so it elevated the Islamic religion, right?
Yeah, from a bunch of desert wanderers who couldn't read because Muhammad was illiterate to these very Persians that also had the Greek culture mixed in. And so you had Persian scholars that were moderate, and they were teaching maybe paradise is not filled full of virgins. Maybe it's more spiritual. And then they would study medicine and math and science. And one of them was Al-Farabi, and another was Avicenna, and another was Averroes. And they were writing on math and astronomy and medicine. And if you were to take a snapshot of the world, you would have thought that this Persian, Arab, Abbasid Empire is about to experience the Renaissance. But it all gets slapped down by a guy named Ghazali, and he was a Mujahideen, renewer of the faith. And he said, stop studying Greek stuff because you'll get pulled away from Islam. Only study the Quran. And so Ghazali shut down this Renaissance revival movement and made Islam more fundamental. And so now the Abbasid Golden Age is beginning to slow down, but it finally gets crushed by the Mongol invasion. So Mongols were a Central Asia people group, started over in Mongolia, but then they had little short horses, and they'd have a rope they tie around the horse with two loops hanging for their big toes because they would ride barefoot. And then they had composite bows where they could shoot over 100 yards while they're riding their horses.
Yes.
And they were unstoppable. And so the Mongols came in and conquered this more moderate Persian culture. And if you remember, Disney did the Aladdin's lamp.
Yes, right.
That was Baghdad. That was the Abbasid Empire. That was this Islamic Golden Age. That was the setting for that. But then the Mongols come in, and you have this one Mongol leader named Hulagu Khan. He's the grandson of Genghis Khan. He conquers Baghdad and almost slaughters everybody in the city. And there was this Mongolian taboo that royal blood is not supposed to touch the ground. So they take the last Abbasid sultan and roll him up in a carpet and trample him with horses because they don't want his blood to touch the ground. It's like, okay.
Right, exactly. Well, real quick, I want to remind everybody, you're listening to Bill Federer. Appreciate the visit here. He's the American Minute creator, a national speaker and author. And we're recounting, the history of Iran. I mean, so much focus on the Middle East and a lot of talk about what's going on in Iran right now. And Bill, I would just say from a historical point, I've been talking with, several spokespeople who are involved in the movement that's taking place in Iran right now. And I've said that it's like they're experiencing their Patrick Henry moment. You've got this groundswell, this organic movement that's happening in Iran right now that says, give me liberty or give me death. I mean, they're absolutely fearless. And thousands of people have died at the hands of, this current regime. But that's up to a current date. But I think what was interesting in this previous segment, when you talked about how, the announcement where you had Iran, or the movement of the Muslims, coming into Persia, making the announcement that, we're not interested in land. We're interested in souls, right?
Yeah. And one of the Mongol subgroups was the Turks, the Oghuz Turks, and then the Seljuk Turks. And they conquered into what is today Turkey. And then they set up the Ottoman Empire, Turks, and that went on for 7 centuries. So fast forward, Iran has several different emperors. After this, you have the Safavid dynasty in Iran that switches from Sunni to Shia, and 15% of Muslims are Shia. They're in Iran. 85% are Sunni, and they're around the rest of the world. And so they have a blood feud that goes back to Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, Shi'at Ali means party of Ali. His son Hussein is murdered by the Sunni. And so the Shiite, Ali's son is murdered by the Sunni. And so they keep this hate alive.
Yeah, it's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. But the philosophical difference, though, Bill, or the religious difference is what? Explain to our audience, Sunni and Shia.
Yeah, so Ali was Muhammad's son-in-law, and he's a blood descendant of Muhammad. And so they claim that they're the rightful heirs, and they rule the Ayatollah is the head of the Shia. He's sort of like the Pope. And it's like what he says goes. He's the divine interpreter. Sunni is more like the Protestants. They're more the local imams can decide. Some of them are more moderate, some are more fundamental. They go back to Muhammad's father-in-law. So Muhammad had lots of father-in-laws because he had lots of wives. The 6-year-old that he married, consummated at 9, Aisha, her father is Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr fought alongside Muhammad in his battles. And so he knew the way. And so the word for the way is Sunni. And so the killing is the followers of the son-in-law fighting the followers of the father-in-law.
Right.
And anyway, but fast forward, so the Persians, they fight the Russians over land around the Caspian Sea, and And then the British send some Anthony and Robert Shirley, two merchant brothers. They go down and start trading with the Persians in the 1600s, Abbas the Great. And then you have the Turks make a treaty with France against Spain. And so now the Turks are fighting the Persians, teamed up with the French fighting England and Spain. And so that Persia was, for a while, sided with Persia, with Spain and England. But the Shirleys eventually brought in the British East India Company and all that. And so with the help of that, the Persians were able to defeat the Turks in many battles. And then we fast forward to the 1800s and oil. So Winston Churchill transitions the British Navy from coal to oil, but there's no oil in England to speak of. And so in 1908, Churchill helps form the Anglo-Persian Oil Company called BP. And then Germany industrializes and has little oil, and so they make a treaty with Abdul Hamid II of Turkey. And so World War I starts, and you got the Germans sided with the Turks against the British sided with the Persians or Iranians. And when the Germans lose, the Turks lose, and the Ottoman Empire is divvied up into Turkey, Israel, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and so forth. And but you have a secular leader takes over in Iran named Reza Shah. And Reza Shah wants to secularize Iran, let women get educated, let them get jobs, let them wear fashions and dress. And so now that the Ottoman Empire is gone, you got Ataturk is secularizing Turkey, getting rid of the fezzes and the burqas, says Mohammedanism is nothing more than Arab politics, may have suited tribes in the deserts, no good for a modern progressive state. And they're wearing business suits. And so you begin to see that the Arab Muslim world is saying, hey, let's be more modern and let's move in the Western direction and let's leave our fundamental stuff behind. And it was going great until 1928, the Muslim Brotherhood was started. And they start assassinating leaders that get too Western. They would infiltrate countries and do assassinations. So Reza Shah is in modernizing Iran, giving freedoms, and then you have World War II. And Reza Shah does not drive out the Germans. And Britain and the Soviet Union team up and do a coup to overthrow Reza Shah. And then coming to power is Mossadegh. He's the prime minister. And he's okay, but then during the Cold War, Mossadegh sides with the Soviet Union, and he's supported by the Tudeh Communist Party. And what does he do? He nationalizes all the oil in Iran, including BP's oil fields and the largest oil refinery in the world, that's BP's. And so Britain is now having an oil shortage. And so they appealed to Eisenhower for help, and Eisenhower has the CIA do Operation Ajax, where we send agents over there to create chaos and overthrow Mossadegh and back Reza Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi Shah. And Reza Pahlavi Shah loves America, and he meets with Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and he's having the Cadillac Seville built over in Iran. It's the fastest growing economy in the world at the time. And he's letting women have freedom, and they can get educated, and they can wear the modern fashions, and he's wanting to secularize the country and get away from all this fanaticism.
Right.
And then Jimmy Carter comes along. And you have, during the Cold War, what's called color revolutions, where the communists will come into a country and find idealistic youth that they can brainwash into creating riots and protests against the leaders that want to have freedom.
Right.
And these youth will cause these riots. And so the Soviets did this in Iran against the Shah. And they were so successful that Jimmy Carter was convinced the Shah was going to be ousted and replaced with a Soviet puppet. And so Jimmy Carter decides, rather than support the Shah and go in militarily, he decides to correspond with Ayatollah Khomeini, who's exiled in France for 15 years. And Khomeini says a bunch of lies and says, oh, if you will help me take power in Iran, I will restore order, and America doesn't have to worry. We'll keep the oil coming and so forth. And so Jimmy Carter is so naive. So he pressures the Shah to leave in 1979, and he stands back while the Ayatollah comes in. The Ayatollah takes all the Shah's generals who are pro-American, brings them to the rooftop of a high school and kills them all, hunts down all the Shah's pro-American supporters, executes them. Sadly, that's been going on these last few weeks again.
Exactly.
And then he starts the Hezbollah. He funds Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis that attack Israel. Why? Israel is standing in the way of the caliphate. They want to have a caliphate, which is a one world Islamic government.
Right, exactly.
And this Ayatollah is part of this Shia eschatology of end times that he believes he's the prophesied troublemaker. The Saeed Khorasan, whatever the name is, who's supposed to create a global war. And then the 12th hidden imam, they think there's an old man living in a cave somewhere for centuries. This 12th hidden imam will come back and crush the little Satan Israel and the big Satan the United States, and then have this caliphate, this one world Islamic government. This Ayatollah,
and that's the vision. Bill, we got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to let you bring us home and put a bow around this historical moment that you've been sharing with us. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yeah, so whenever you see Iran doing all this bad stuff, you can thank Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
Because Jimmy Carter is the one who ushered in Ayatollah Khomeini. And
with the help of the CIA, no doubt.
Probably,
our intelligent wonderkins, right?
Yeah. And so the Ayatollah is so fundamental that he insists the Quran only be recited in Arabic, and the people speak Farsi. So this is like a foreign religion that's forced on the people. And they have religious beliefs that beat women if they're not clothed. They cut off the 4 fingers of a hand if you're a thief. And for your second offense, you get your left foot cut off. They allow polygamy and all kinds of stuff. But the worst is they want to have this very fundamental Islamic Sharia state. And they want to export it around the world. And they now have Hezbollah chapters in Venezuela that are infiltrating drug gangs and coming across our southern border into America. And so when you had these people in Iran demonstrating for freedom, and they thought America was going to come to their rescue, they had picked up some comments thinking that, hey, America's going to come like they did in Venezuela. And we didn't. And so they proceeded in the last 3 weeks to kill, estimated now, over 50,000 of these young, mostly they're under 30-year-old demonstrators, and putting them in prison and torturing them. And so they're praying that America will do something to get rid of this fanatical, even Ronald Reagan called him a maniacal fanatic that Jimmy Carter let seize power in Iran. So anyway, so we need to pray. And ironically enough, Christianity is the fastest growing religion in Iran. And CBN did a report on the people having dreams of Jesus. Right. So in the midst of this crisis, but we need to pray for the people in Iran. And I pray that we do something to stop the killing and to get rid of this terrible regime over there.
Well, Trump has sent over a flotilla, a serious flotilla of armament there to get the Ayatollah's attention. And again, credit the people there in Iran on the streets, all these factions that have come together that have this organic movement, like I said, that are having a kind of a Patrick Henry movement, we might say, in American translation of, give me liberty or give me death. Bill, I want to extend this for just a minute because I know that you've been at recent conferences where even in this country, that old rallying cry that was shouted out by the Muslims that they're not interested in land as much as the people, that how the Muslims have come into America. I mean, it's projected right now, we're looking at about 2.5 million Muslims in America. By the year 2030, it's projected to grow to 6.2 million, which is a 140% increase in America alone, Bill.
Yeah, and the majority of Muslims are moderate and they just want to live their lives. But when they see the West abandoning our allies and showing weakness, the fundamental Muslims are emboldened. Mm-hmm. And the fundamental ones are just as happy to kill a moderate Muslim as they are to kill an infidel. And so the moderate ones are being pressured to move in the more fundamental direction. And so we're seeing a radicalization taking place. And there's two ways that Islam has spread, the sword or infiltration. And so it is called Dawah, D-A-W-A-H, Dawah. And so where the first ones come in and they're nice and they're so nice, people say they're nice, let more in. So more come in. Started with Henry Ford, and he hated unions, and he's traveling the world looking for another source of rubber. And he's over in Yemen in the Far East, and a Yemeni man is really good at putting his luggage on the boat. And Henry Ford said, show up in Detroit and I'll pay you $5 a day. Well, that news spread, and you began to have an Arab migration into Detroit, and they worked hard, and they were good workers, and they did not unionize, and they started the first Islamic society in America and the first mosque in America. And they were hardworking and great people, but their children have been becoming more and more radicalized, and partly because they're seeing the growth happen that they think is part of their caliphate, their goal of a one world Islamic government. So the Dawah is this civilizational jihad where they come in and have kids. And so in Europe, the Muslim immigrants, the man can have 4 wives. So one of them is registered as a wife, and the other 3 simply go down to the welfare office and say, I'm pregnant, but I don't have a husband, and they get welfare. And the man just visits his different wives, and the more children they have, the more the welfare checks get bigger.
Right, exactly.
And it's a social stigma for a Muslim woman to have less than 5 kids, where the Europeans have bought into all the climate change and they're having maybe 1 kid. Yes. So by 2050, the Muslims will have a complete majority, and they'll simply vote in Sharia. And so they're doing that in America. And it's called Dawah. Again, I want to reemphasize that word. And so they'll come into communities and take advantage of the freedoms to buy land, like in Texas, this epic development where they bought 7,000 acres. I was recently in Indian River, Florida, and the Muslims bought like 5,000 acres, and they want to have this big mega complex. And they're doing this around the country. And it was faced during the Cold War with Eisenhower. And you had communists wanting to come in and organize to overthrow the country. And Eisenhower said, no group can use the Bill of Rights as a privileged sanctuary from which to wage war to destroy the Bill of Rights. In other words, you can't say, I want freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, right? But my goal is to set up a form of government that does not allow freedom of speech.
Exactly.
So you can't say, oh, we want freedom of religion, but our goal is to set up Sharia where we're not going to allow freedom of religion. And so the idea is that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And what's a better inheritance than freedom to be able to believe the gospel? So we need to realize that Patrick Henry said, our mild religion teaches us to forgive and forget. We must practice this as individuals. But when you apply to this the concept of patriot, this does not apply. As a patriot, we have to defend our country so that we can give our children the same freedoms that we got. And he goes, observations of this kind are uncomfortable but necessary. So it's like, I don't like to talk about this. As an individual, yeah, let them slap you around all you want. But you don't want to let them, you don't want to stand by while they slap your wife and kids around.
Right,
Right? You're
exactly.
supposed to defend
Well,
the innocent, rebuke the oppressor, right? Defend
mhm.
the orphan and the widow. And so you can let them treat you however you want, but you're supposed to defend and pass on a godly inheritance to your children.
Yeah, your children's children. How many mosques have opened now in the country, in the United States? Do we have a number?
Well, at Henry Ford's time, right? The Muslims had the first mosque
Yeah, the
ever,
one. Right.
and that was just like maybe the 1950s.
Hmm.
But they have been infiltrating, and 100 mosques have opened in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in the last 2 years.
A
And,
hundred
and
in the last 2 years.
right. And even areas where they're not allowed, they'll come in and have some like little church by the property, and then
Yeah.
once they get it, they'll uh, pay
Mm.
them off, and then they'll resell it, and the Muslims will buy it,
Hmm.
and they'll operate under the table for maybe 10 years even.
Right.
And then finally they'll start coming out, and the people say, when did that get there? Oh, we've been here for a long time. And it's like, well,
Mm.
and so they're playing the long game.
Yeah.
And so then they get politicians involved. I recently was at a meeting, and they showed clips of these from Muslim meetings where they're saying we need to get elected into public office, and maybe we can get 50 congressmen in the U.S. Congress because the Christians aren't voting, and all we got to do is mobilize people to vote. And once we get in,
There you
then we'll
go.
push
Yeah,
Sharia.
exactly.
And
Well, well, we got to leave it there. Bill Federer, thank you so much for being with us. Remind everybody again how they can connect with you and subscribe to the American Minute.
Oh, thanks. It's AmericanMinute.com. And the book I wrote is called What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A
Mhm.
History of Islam in the United States.
Well, Bill Federer, thank you very much. God bless you a ton, huh? Appreciate
Thank
you.
you, Bill.
You got it. Take care. Well, that's a wrap for us. Thank you so much for sharing a part of your day with us. For more information on the show, go to BillMartinezLive.com. Our thanks again to the one and only Bill Federer. May God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Have a great day, America.